Hello and welcome everybody to the first episode of Smithsonian Social Studies Online. I am so pleased to be with you today. My name is Ashley Naranjo, and I am a Smithsonian Museum educator at the Smithsonian Center for Learning and Digital Access. That is a central education office in Washington, D.C., and today we're broadcasting from home, but I am joined by two colleagues from the National Museum of American History. So I'd like to introduce you to Eden Cho and Abby Pfisterer. Eden, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Eden Cho. I'm the education technologist for our pre-K to 12 team at the Smithsonian's National Museum of American History.
And Abby, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Abby Pfisterer. I'm an education specialist, and I'm also at the Smithsonian's National Museum of American History with Eden. We're really excited to talk to you today.
Excellent. So we have lots of people that are joining us today. Lots of people saying hello in the chat. So good to see you guys. Lots of people were mentioning too, they were looking at the image that was on the video beforehand and trying to pick out all of the Smithsonian artifacts that they recognize. So very cool. Eden, why don't we go to the next slide to tell folks about what we'll be talking about today. So today we're going to be talking about who are we as a people? So that's a nice big question for us, a nice juicy question to look at it from a lot of different points of view. And so today, like I said, we're going to look at things like culture, tradition, conflict, and ideals. Before we get started, I wanted to mention that this session will be recorded. So if you are either a teacher, a student, or have someone that you'd like to share this with, the session will be archived and available on this specific URL. So you can share it with a friend if you'd like. You can give us a thumbs up. All right. So Eden, do you want to take it away and share some of the resources that you'll be sharing during this hour?
Sure. First, does anyone have any questions? Because we did dedicate a whole slide for this.
Excellent. So if you have a question for Eden, feel free to type it into the chat box. That's where you can ask questions of Eden, of Abby, of myself. Basically, what our job is as museum educators is to help people understand all of the different objects, artworks, artifacts that are in our collection and the different expertise and make connections to teaching and learning. So if you have a question, please feel free to type it into the chat box. And basically what happens is if you have a question, what I'll do is I will go through and put them in order and try to prioritize which questions. So for example, I'll add a kind of little bar here at the bottom so that you can see the question that we're answering at a given time too. All right, and like I said, this will be recorded, so you can always go back and reference it later. All right, so it looks like we don't have any questions just yet, but...
Actually, it looks like we do from a student, from Ryan. Do Somalians live throughout the USA?
Oh, there you go, okay.
So what we can do, this is a great way to get started. Thank you for asking that question. As we're looking up some of the things, we'll try our best to provide some resources from the Smithsonian that can help answer your question. We might not always have it, but we'll have some things. And so, Eden, I don't know if we might want to look up the Many Voices, One Nation exhibit to share with Ryan. It's not specifically about Somalian migration, but it is about migration, and it might be a really useful source for you. So Eden's going to pull that up and show you a place where you can learn some more about this.
Yeah, so if you go to our main website, it's www.americanhistory.si.edu. You can go to Explore History, the tab up at the top, and head on over to online exhibitions. So what's amazing is that some of our exhibits don't just live within our museum walls. We've digitized them, and you can actually see them online on our website. So if we head on down They are in alphabetical order. So let me just find the M's here.
And while Eden's looking, I'm going to answer Anna Lynn's question of what is the most common artifact. It's a tough one. I'd have to say, though, that if you go to the American History website where Eden is, you could search for the ruby slippers. Those are really popular. Those were used in the filming of The Wizard of Oz. They're at the museum, and you can see all about them online. And so definitely what I would say is the most commonly requested artifact. And there you go. Eden, under the title there, Smithsonian Education, has shared the link for this website. And as you can see, she's scrolling through it now. I'll hand it back over to you.
Yep. Yeah, you can check out the online exhibit. You can click through, look at some of the object records of some of the collection items that we have on view in this particular exhibit. So this is one of the many great resources that we have of, we may not be able to go to the museum right now, but you can certainly explore it online.
Nice. All right, let's talk about Michael and Marilena. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Your questions, before we kind of jump into some more resources, you've asked, how do we have all these artifacts and why are artifacts so important? Those are great questions. I love that so much. So the Smithsonian and the various museums that are part of it, the National Museum of American History is one of those museums. That's our role. That's our function. Our mission is to collect the different objects that can help us better understand American history by the things that we make and create, the things that we use, the things we keep. So for example, those ruby slippers are such a great way to learn about American entertainment, the different ideas that were going on at the time that movie was made. So we do these things to help us better understand history and then to use that information to help us understand what's going on today. And that's a lot about what we're talking about with who are we as a people. And I know we had a few questions about that earlier on of what is this question? What does this even mean? So let's jump into some of our featured resources because like some of you asked, is this a complicated question? Yeah, it's a really complicated question. It means we talk about our artifacts, but we really also talk about the identities that we have as a people across the nation and across the world. It means we talk about some of the cultures and the values and the ideals that we share. So it's a lot of different things wrapped up into one short question. And, I know we haven't gotten to everyone's question. We'll do our best, but let's jump in here and talk about some of these first resources, kind of from the top level about what it means on the more like institutional side in terms of democracy and government, things like that. And then we'll talk a little bit more about events and some cultural stuff as well. So Eden, take it away.
Thank you. So the first resource we have for all of you is called American Democracy, A Great Leap of Faith. And this is another exhibit that exists within our museum walls, but also has been digitized and you can visit it on our website. So the exhibit explores the history of citizen participation, debate, and compromise from the nation's formation to today. So you can go through the exhibit as if you were in the museum. It starts from the year 1776, exploring the political power and dynamic between the British and the Americans, and looking at the last 100 years in the fight for the right to vote by groups of marginalized people. And then to today, asking ourselves what the rights and responsibilities of citizens are. And along the way, again, just like with Many Voices, One Nation, you can click through some of the collection's objects and do object-based learning if that's what you want to do. And now at the end of the online exhibit, I'm just going to jump ahead. There is a section called Education, and that provides two amazing resources. So if you head on down, one is called Young People Shake Up Elections, History Proves It, and the other is called The Teaching Guide. So this guide is great. If you're looking for a historical anchor, something to tie back to the exhibit, I'm just gonna show you what it sort of looks like. So I do want to include a disclaimer here that this guide does require the accompanying exhibit book. And unfortunately, like many of you, we are spending our days working from our homes. So while we cannot mail these books out to you, there are questions here that if you're a student, you can go through the exhibit, try to find the answers. You can do independent research. So this is great for that. And then if I head on back to Young People Shake Up Elections, this is a video series. There's 5 videos of about 5 minutes each. It's absolutely brand new resource from the National Museum of American History. And this is great if you're looking for both a contemporary and a historical anchor. It looks at how young people can participate in the elections and in civics today. And so we look at this, these themes from both a historical lens that young people have always been a part of the electoral process, have always been active in civics action, civics participation, and from the contemporary lens of what young people are feeling and thinking about today when they think of democracy in the United States. So if you are a young person watching this webinar right now, head on over to these videos. There are some really great discussion prompts like, why will your generation matter? What history are you making? So these are really great videos to watch with some of your friends, with your classmates, and have answer some of these questions amongst yourselves. So the second resource that we have for all of you is called American Experiments. So American Experiments also exists within our museum walls as interactive activities, but we have adapted them to be brought into the classrooms. So as you can see, there are several experiments that challenge students to think about their roles and responsibilities within their democracy. And they usually surround a single question. And we're just going to look at 2 of them. One is called Head-to-Head History Makers, and the other is called Ideals and Images. So now if you're looking, if you are an educator, and you need a already put together lesson plan with standards, with objectives, with essential questions, this is great if that's what you are looking for. Everything is outlined here at the beginning of what you and your students will be doing. It's modified so that if you want something for a 50-minute lesson versus a 90-minute lesson, it gives you suggestions on where to pace yourselves, where to spend some of those minutes in. Has a glossary of terms. So head-to-head is, it has brackets, kind of like March Madness. And there are 2 questions that your students can answer. One is called Who Changed, or one asks, who changed America more? And the other is, which food is more American? So it challenges your students to present arguments for why their historical figure changed America more, or why their food is more American. I'm going to try to skip down to, so you see some of the brackets that's already designed for you, and some sample lists. So now this is just a sample. You can modify if you need to. And it's just a fun way for students to tell compelling and factual stories of their figure or food item. It's a way to compare and contrast. And overall, it's just a way to engage in civil discourse and practice persuasive speaking skills. So these, so we really love sharing this with our educators. We play it at some of our professional developments, and we have a lot of fun seeing what everyone's, winner is. And the other,
Eden, I would love to interrupt for just a second. We have a lot of questions. So I was going to
Great.
pause just a second
Yeah.
and answer some of the questions, because I know people are especially eager to have some of them answered. And many of them are actually questions that have been sparked based on some of the resources that you've been sharing. So a few ones that I wanted to point out. So one student has been asking, and actually a few students have been asking this, but Josiah says, do you think it is appropriate for young people to vote? Do you think they will bias towards the person they wish not to be elected?
Such a good question. And I mean, it's definitely one that doesn't have a right answer. It's an opinion-based question because it depends on how you feel about it, how you think who should be voting. The American franchise, which is basically who gets the right to vote, has slowly expanded over the past 200 years, as we've been a nation. Young people, they've been given more and more opportunities to vote throughout history. So the 26th Amendment, that dropped the voting age from 21 down to 18. And that was in response to the Vietnam War, when young people, 18-year-olds, were able to fight but couldn't yet vote. And so that amendment was put through to help address that problem. Now, when you're thinking about younger people, there are examples where people younger than 18 are starting to get the opportunity to vote. We're here in Washington, D.C., and there's a suburb called Tacoma Park, Maryland, where 16-year-olds can now vote in local elections. In other states and municipalities are thinking about doing the same thing. So who gets the right to vote? While it seems like this really structured institution, it can change. And so it depends on who we think should have the vote. And that's very much true of whether or not young people should vote. And in the videos that Eden was just referencing, each story talks about how a young person who may not have the ability to vote and may have never had it, for example, a young woman before the Civil War, she wouldn't have had the right to vote because that didn't come until the early 1900s. She still did her best to participate and to persuade others to vote. So it's such a good question. I wish I could be like, yes, I want young people to vote because that's wonderful, and we do. But not everyone's going to agree with that, right? And so it's such a great question to discuss. And Alexander, I agree. What happens if you don't vote? Yeah, if you've got the ability to vote and you don't exercise it, a lot of people would say that's an opportunity lost. But it's a personal decision if you choose to vote or not vote, if you have the opportunity to do it. So definitely something that's pertinent this election year. So Ashley, thank you so much for highlighting that.
Yeah. Thanks, Abby and Eden, for answering that question and highlighting these videos too. I think that's really important to think about. We have another question, and it's come in a lot of different forms throughout the chat. One person mentions, where do you get the information from the artifacts? Another says, do you have to memorize all the facts about the artifacts? And there was even a question earlier too about, what if you don't know all of the information when you receive an artifact? So I know you both are museum educators, and this might be kind of outside of your role of accepting museum objects, but what can you tell us about the information that museums know about specific objects in the collection?
Eden, do you want to go?
Sure. Ashley, I'm not sure if you're still sharing my screen, but
yes, we are.
Oh, perfect. So like Ashley said, I am a museum educator, and the collections world is beyond my field of expertise. So if I'm being perfectly honest, I don't know much about a lot of the objects that we have. And what's great about working at a museum is that everyone has their own area of expertise. So even though I may not always have the answer, there are experts that I can go to if I have questions. And one of the resources I like to utilize a lot, even within my own job, is looking up our own collections on our website. So again, on our americanhistory.si.edu, I can search the collection. So you see, I've already done some sort of research in preparation for today. And I'm going to look up the ruby slippers that Abby has mentioned. earlier today. Please excuse my slow internet. I have a lot of tabs up just for today. And what's great is that I can also click this box here that says show only items with images if that's what I'm looking for. You can filter your results here on the right-hand side. And these Dorothy's Ruby Slippers, this is what Abby was talking about earlier when she answered that question of what's our most popular or most requested object. And you'll see that there is a description. So our curators and our collections managers and assistants, everyone works really hard to include a lot of information so that if you as an educator, as a student, as a general audience member need to find more information, you can come down here. You can look at what the shoes are made out of, what who designed it, how big they are, how small they are, when it came into our collection. So we do have a lot of people who put in a lot of time and effort to this kind of research. So if we don't have the answers right away, then when something comes into our collection or when someone wants to donate an item, then that's their job to do the research. I hope that answered your question a little bit.
No, that's great, Eden. That really helps. We have 2 more questions I wanted to get to, and then we'll jump back into presenting some resources. One of which is just a great question. This is an opportunity. Basically, you have 3 museum educators kind of at your home today, kind of helping share some resources. And so one of the questions from James was, hi, to be a museum educator, were your majors in college social studies, education, or something to do with world cultures? So Eden, do you want to share what your background is in?
Sure. So I received my bachelor's in art history, and then I got my master's in museum studies. So both of them very, very general, very vague. A lot of my internships, a lot of my jobs, even throughout college, were all in education. So that is sort of how I was able to find my own interests. That's how they merged, and that's how I became a museum educator.
Excellent. And what about you, Abby?
So, and when I was an undergrad, when I went to college, I studied history education. I thought I was going to be a classroom teacher, and political science. And then I went on and got a graduate degree in business administration. I'm kind of a weirdo in the field. But it's been useful because being a museum educator is all about thinking about how to use museum resources and artifacts to share with people who are in the K-12 system, whether it's students, teachers, or parents. And there's a lot of organizing that goes on in there, a lot of planning and budgeting and project management. So it kind of made sense at the end of the day to have that degree. But if you have an interest in education or an interest in history, that's a good starting point towards this sort of career.
Absolutely, absolutely. And then just to add to that, my background in college, I studied education, and I went to the School of Education. And then just recently, just about 2 years ago, I got a degree in learning design and technology, which today seems especially relevant since a lot of us are figuring out how to do teaching and learning online. So lots of different inroads and paths to the types of careers that the 3 of us have. And then I wanted to answer one other question that's been coming up a lot. I know a lot of people have a lot of questions that they wanted answered. If you just ask it once, it'll help me to kind of make sense and prioritize which one we answer. So just kind of a heads up for people in the chat that are asking their question over and over again. We'll get to as many as we can, but just a heads up to leave one comment versus kind of a lot of comments. But the question that I thought was really interesting, and I'm curious if Eden and Abby have heard of any stories of museums that have had any stolen objects. And I have one, a story to tell if that's helpful. So if you look up the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum, that's in Boston, Massachusetts. It's not part of the Smithsonian, but they actually had a huge art theft, and they have an ongoing investigation. And basically right now they're actually offering a $10 million reward because they haven't figured out how this crime happened. So I linked to it in the chat box. That's something to totally investigate and check out for yourself. There's even a great podcast talking with all the security guards that were on duty that night and trying to figure out how it possibly could have happened. So yes, sometimes it does happen. It's very uncommon, and that's why this is such an interesting case. It's kind of a mystery still. It happened back in the 90s, and so the museum has actually left the walls blank where there were artworks because they're still hoping, they're holding out hope for the fact that maybe someone will return them when they find them over time. But it's been almost 20 years, so actually almost 30 years now. So really kind of interesting. Eden and Abby, have you heard of any other things like that?
I only know of one, and I won't say the museum because in a lot of cases this isn't, it's not something you're out shouting from the rooftops. But that museum had exhibit artifacts, and artifacts are anything that are material culture or like stuff, right? It can be anything from a painting to a shoe. It's whatever we determine is a material object that reflects our history. There's a very generalized definition. They had an artifact in every space of this museum, and there was one small room that they didn't really think about and forgot that there was no security guard in there and that there was a window. So someone went into this room, grabbed the artifact, and went out the window. And so they never saw it again. But very rare that you hear about this sort of stuff. Like Ashley said, it just doesn't happen that often.
Wow.
All right. You have a suggestion?
Well, I heard a rumor that the Mona Lisa was stolen once and recovered, but that's why even today it's under bulletproof glass. There is a bodyguard next to it, or like a security guard. It's why there is a distance rule. You can't get too close to the Mona Lisa. But someone may want to fact check me because I don't know all of the details.
Excellent. So that's just a great reminder too, that a lot of times we're seeing things on social media. We're hearing about things that just sound too good to be true or too surprising. And so a great way to be a good digital citizen and practice digital citizenship is to do a little bit of research on our own to kind of confirm or deny some of the claims that we're hearing across the board. All right, so we're going to jump back into the presentation. But again, if you have questions, a great way to ask questions is in the chat, and we'll save some time at the end for additional questions. But so far, you guys have had some really great questions about the Smithsonian in general, museums, history, voting, and I want to keep those questions coming too. So Eden, do you want to continue on?
Sure, thank you. So going back to ideals and images, we left off at American experiments. This is another experiment called Ideals and Images, and it's a card game essentially. So it has the guiding question of, do Americans have shared ideals, and what do they look like? So again, thinking back to who are we as a people, when we talk about shared ideals, that's one way, one strategy we can get to the bigger question. So students investigate this by closely examining words that expresses American ideals. So let me try to, okay, so if, so everyone receives a deck of cards with images, and after choosing one word, for example, participation, you can choose the image that you think best describes participation. So, and after everyone flips over their cards and sees what the other has chosen for their image, you share out why you believe your image best exemplifies that word, or your process, why you chose that image. So again, another great discussion-based resource. And I do want to mention, with all of these resources, there will need modifications depending on your needs, based on your access. If you don't necessarily have access to a printer, printing out pages of images for your deck of cards is really not an option. So again, please feel free to modify any of our resources as needed. And I'm going to turn it over to Abby to continue some of our resources regarding Civil War.
Yep. Awesome. Thanks, Eden. So Eden's been talking a lot about how, as an American people, we are so varied. We have different ideals, different cultures, and there's no one answer to that. Another part of how we kind of think about who we are as a people is some of the big events that we've had in American history that have really shaped how we think about what we believe in, what's right, how we treat each other. And in many ways, that can be a lot of stories coming out of the Civil War. And so when we think about the Civil War, it's this incredibly pivotal moment in American history. And, we're thinking about slavery versus not having slaves. How will states' rights exist? How will we think about our economy? But it does really come down to slavery or not. And that's a big decision. And so if you're interested in learning about the Civil War and that incredibly challenging time in American history and even the legacies of it, Eden's got a search up on the screen right now from our website for students and teachers called History Explorer. And it gives you all sorts of resources that you can look at. For example, you can see right now Abraham Lincoln's life mask. This is a 3D digitization of his mask and what his face looked like. And you can look at the shape of it and read more about his life in the context and what role he played during this time. Of course, he's our president during the Civil War. He's got the Emancipation Proclamation. So there's quite a bit there that you can go through. And Eden, can you scroll up just a little bit? I want to show the search option. One of the things I really love about this website is one, that it has both lesson plans if you're a teacher, but that it also has artifacts and videos and things like that if you just want to find some information. It's got a lot of different resources. And then you can see in the right column, there's different ways that you can filter this. So it looks like we've got some middle school students on here with us potentially, and maybe some high school students. You can filter by grades 6 to 8, grades 9 to 12. And really that filtering just kind of gets at grade level, but you're welcome to look at everything, of course. And you can see there's other search functions there too. Another resource here on this list that I wanted to highlight is one you can see almost at the bottom there, Changing America to Be Free. Eden, do you mind going to that one? There we go. So this is another online exhibit that was once an in-person exhibit at the museum. I know somebody asked a while back if the museum's closed right now. Yes, it is closed for a little while in order to keep everybody safe. But most of our exhibits are online. And so this one, even though it closed years ago, you can access it online. And it's an exhibit on emancipation of slaves, what happened in 1863 and the legacy of that in 1963. And so you can look and read and learn about through artifacts and through photographs and through descriptions from curators and educators, how the Civil War shaped the American people, what it did to change our ideas of who we are and our sense of community, how we treat different communities and how we work together. And so I really encourage you, if you're exploring this question of who are we as a people, to dive in and to look at artifacts like what Eden's showing you right now. It's really interesting. And Eden, I can't really see clearly. Do you want to talk about what you're showing?
Sure. So I'm in the online exhibit page, and there are a few photos at the bottom that I clicked, and this looks like it's called Slave Button, and it looks like we borrowed this from the National Museum of African American History and Culture. It gives credit right here.
Nice. So yeah, so the artifacts, that piece of material culture there, they really tell us a lot about who we were as a people a little more than 150 years ago. And then I want to talk about a different resource that can tell us about how this event has shaped us today. And so I know I'm moving quickly and we could always go back and talk about things, but I do want to make time for all the questions that people are asking because they're really great questions. I want to talk about this resource Eden has up right now called the National Youth Summit on Abolition. And so the National Youth Summit is an annual event. It's all digital. It's basically a time when once a year we look at a moment in history and talk about what that meant then and what it meant now and how, again, it's shaped us. And that's very much what the National Youth Summit on Abolition was all about. And these are meant for middle and high schoolers to participate in. So we certainly hope you'll join us for this year's, which will be in September, on youth voting, for a lot of you who are asking questions about that. But this one here is about abolition. And what you can do, you can see there's a video there embedded in the page. You can click on that. You can watch it. You can learn all about different people's takes on what it means to be an abolitionist then, how we treat each other today. There is a teenager on the screen in the panel who really talks passionately about race relations at our high school and how there is a legacy of the Civil War that has yet to be dealt with, at least in her community. I really encourage you to watch it. It's a little long. It's about an hour. You can break it up into chunks if you want. And then on the right side, there are also resources, primary resources that you can learn more about. There's lesson plans. It's just something we encourage you to explore as you think about this question of who are we as a people. And I see Haley had a question. Do we have Abraham Lincoln's hat? Yeah, that's in the National Museum of American History's collection. Sometimes it's on display, sometimes it's not. But if you go into the American History website and search for Abraham Lincoln's hat, you'll find it. And Eden might be able to pull that up for you right now as an example. Let's see if she can find it. Let's see, there's a lot of Abraham Lincoln collection items at the museum, as I'm sure you can imagine. There it is. So yeah, so there's description there. You can learn about the hat and a bit more about his life. It's a great starting place. So I'm really glad you asked that. Thank you, Haley.
Abby, with objects like the top hat, I know we have a lot of other objects from Abraham Lincoln's life. How can we learn more about Abraham Lincoln by simply looking at an object like a top hat? Is there kind of some good questions we could ask of objects to better understand someone's life?
Yeah, absolutely. And Eden, please feel free to jump in here as well. Objects can tell us so much about people and their stories and the context and the time period that they lived within. We can look at this hat here and the first way to start is just to look really critically at it, right? So analyze the hat, look at the details of it, try to pay attention to even the smallest details instead of just saying like, yeah, it's a top hat, moving on. Well, let's look at it. Let's look at the fashion, right? So this is a particular style that you would have seen popular around the 1860s amongst men. It's a little taller than some men might have worn. So interestingly, because Lincoln was very tall to start with, and this hat would have added to his stature, maybe it made him more prominent in crowds. I don't know, but something to think about. He was very, very tall, particularly with this hat on. You can look at it. You can see some of the details there as well. So that's step one, always looking at an object in close detail, thinking about what is it? What does it look like? What's fashionable about it? What's different about it? What's unusual? And then going a little deeper as Eden's showing you. You can see a description that she's scrolling by right now. You can see the year it was made. You can see a lot of different pieces of information about it. Eden, what do you want to add?
I think you covered it really well. Yeah.
It's also a starting point, right? So objects can be an access point. So if you find something interesting like Abraham Lincoln's hat, you can start there and then it can drive you a little bit deeper. So if in the description you see, 1860s, interesting. You can go Google 1860s, learn more about what's going on. We know he was president, so he was living in Washington, D.C. You could go think about what's going on in Washington, D.C. in 1860. Well, they're thinking about whether or not they want to free the slaves that are here in D.C. right around that time, a little bit before too. And so you can kind of dig into it layer by layer. And one of the things I love about objects is it's a great way to start asking questions, right? So first is what is it? Then it's who wore it? What did that person do? When did they live? What was going on in their world? What did they care about, right? It's a question starter in many ways. I think that's actually a lot of fun. Maybe that's kind of a teacher in me, but the chance to just simply ask questions, when do we get to do that and someone not tell us to stop asking questions? This is a really good opportunity to just ask everything you want. And I can tell by the chat, you're really good at asking questions. So Maybe take a practice run at it. I'd recommend it. Thanks, Ashley. That was a great question.
Oh, good. I'm so glad. Yeah. I mean, I think the more that we ask questions about this, it's almost like being kind of an investigator or a detective with history. We could say, yes, this is just a simple top hat, or we could start to think about the ways that this helps us better understand the person who owned this object. So I love the way you've kind of framed that for us, Abby. If you have any questions, please feel free to use the chat box on the right-hand side. Eden and Abby, are you open for questions now, or do you have a few more things to share with us?
I have a few more things to share with everyone. So I think many of us can agree that COVID-19 has further highlighted areas of inequities. We've heard from a lot of educators and caregivers expressing concern and frustration about distance learning for their students and children because of access. So the lack of access to technology, the lack of access to reliable internet, the lack of access to materials. So we do want to share two resources with you all that can be low technology or technology free. So the first is called Design Your Own Monument. This is from the Lemelson Center for the Study of Invention and Innovation. We have one of their, they're in many places, but there is one with in our museum at the National Museum of American History. And so they have a very short step-by-step instructions for creating your own monument using materials and objects you might find around your house. And again, being as creative as possible with the limited resources available to you at hand. This is great for elementary school students if you have a young child or a younger sibling at home. This is just a really fun art project for you to do. If you do have time, if you do have some access to technology, we just came out with a really great week-long instructional lesson plan for you to do at home. We used Learning Lab as our platform. It's free, it's user-friendly, and it provides learning tasks for 5 days. It's designed for 30 to 35 minutes per day, and you go through, again, sort of the historical lens of what is a memorial? Why do we create memorials? Why is it important? And then all the way ends in culminating into a final task of designing your own monument. So if you have the time, if you have the access to technology, we do recommend these playlists. We have curated one for middle school students and another for high school students. They're not on memorials, but the middle school is on westward expansion, and the one geared for high school students is about labor organizing in the United States. So I would check them out here, learninglab.si.edu, and we publish all of our collections under our museum name, the National Museum of American History. So the other resource that I do want to share with all of you is from the Smithsonian National Postal Museum. They have a curriculum called Design It, Student Stamps for America. And this is also an instructional lesson plan that provides learning tasks for multiple lessons. So you can divide this over several days. It does provide historical context to how stamps first started appearing within the postal operations. It provides informative context to all the different parts of a stamp. Like when you look at a letter, what are all of those waves that you see when you first receive a letter? I didn't know what that was. I actually learned that from this curriculum. And finally, it provides arts integration. So at the end, students can design their own stamp. So with all of these arts integration lessons, I do want to add that we love receiving final works created or written by your students. If you are a student joining us here today, feel free to send them to our email address is historyteachers@si.edu. If you want to tweet us a photo of your art project that you've created using one of our resources, our handle is @amhistorymuseum. Or if you just want to offer feedback on some of the resources that you've used, feel free to contact us.
And Eden, can we show that one last resource that we found this morning from the National Portrait Gallery?
Oh, sure. I completely skipped over that.
It's such a good one. So some of our colleagues, museum educators at another Smithsonian museum called the National Portrait Gallery, provided this resource as well. It's another learning lab collection, just like what Eden was talking about. And it's great. I know today we've been talking a lot about kind of a various range of what makes us or who are we as a people. And we intentionally did not give you an answer because there is no answer necessarily to that. But this learning lab collection that they created really goes through a lot of the different pieces that could help inform an answer towards that or towards your opinion of that question. So we highly encourage you to look at that. Eden's looking at it here, and you can see, Ashley, what's the best way we've got all of these things linked up in our own learning lab collection. Is there a way we can share that larger learning lab collection?
Yeah. So
Okay.
I can add that to the chat box in just a little
perfect.
bit. Yeah. If you want to send it to me, or you can actually add it to
That's
Abby
true.
if you'd like, if you have the URL.
Yeah.
I know that we've had a little bit of technical difficulties over the last 10 minutes that I've been working on kind of behind the scenes. Some folks haven't been able to use the chat, so I apologize for that. But you had lots of good questions for the first half hour, so I really appreciate the way that you've kind of thought about thinking critically about history through museum objects, through artworks, through artifacts. So Abby's going to try to add that link to the chat. It's also in the description of the YouTube video too. So if you look at the title and then there's a short description, you can click on that link to find more resources related to this big, juicy question of who are we as a people? Eden and Abby have shared so many great resources with us. They've looked at this question from a variety of different objects perspectives, as well as different time periods, different places. And so we also invite you to, if you're a teacher, there are ways to email historyteachers@si.edu. And if you email them, they can help find additional lesson plans and other resources for classroom teachers. So Eden and Abby, you're having difficulty too with the chat? Okay, great. So we'll make sure that you can see it in the description. It's already there. That link is included there. Apologies for the chat. I do think that sometimes when we write too many, I think YouTube thinks, oh, actually they're trying to spam. So it actually stops us from being able to chat, unfortunately. But we'll keep that in mind for next time too. We also have a session this evening at 5 p.m. And then what's the schedule for the rest of the time, Abby?
Yeah, so we're doing these Smithsonian Social Studies online sessions every Thursday, so starting today. And they go at 11 a.m. Eastern Time and 5 p.m. Eastern Time. And they're set up for 4 weeks currently. So this being week 1. Today we just did this one. We had a great conversation tonight at 5 o'clock. And then the next 3 Thursdays will be on at 11 and on at 5 p.m., always Eastern Time. So adjust that for wherever you are right now. And, we will consider extending if this is working, and we'll just figure it out. And, there's a lot up in the air right now. So we're just happy to connect with you, answer questions, and be a resource and a help as we best possibly can.
Absolutely. Before we go, are there anything kind of last words you want to share with the audience?
We, of course, hope you are all safe and well. We hope everyone is doing all right. Not watching too much Netflix, but so we highly encourage you to check out these resources. And as Ashley said, email us, historyteachers@si.edu. We're here to answer questions provide resources, even if they're not Smithsonian. You know, we might be able to help you find something, whether it's a lesson plan or something that a student might be looking for. That's our goal, is to be as helpful as possible. Eden, anything?
I will say that if you are spending a lot of time on Netflix, there are some really great documentaries. There's a lot of great films out right now. One of my favorite that is brand new is called Self-Made. It's the story of Madam C.J. Walker. So yeah, even if you are spending your days watching Netflix, I hope you get to watch something that you're learning from, something where you can sort of slip into a different time period and then do have the opportunity to do additional research. So like Abby said, never stop asking questions, never stop feeding that curiosity of yours, and go down that rabbit hole of a topic that you're passionate about, that you want to find answers to. And yeah, to Abby's sentiment, we're here for you. We have a lot of resources. If email is not the best option, again, we're on a lot of the major social media platforms. But yeah, you can find a lot of information at our main website.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Abby and Eden. I just heard from folks that actually YouTube in general, all of the comments are not working at this time. So it was a much larger issue than just our online room. But I'm glad that we got at least 30 minutes of great questions with lots of students. Kind of a shout out to, it seems like Mr. Larson's class might be joining us. So a big shout out to them. I know you can't ask questions anymore in the chat, but thank you for all of your wonderful questions about museums, about specific topics that you were interested in. It's been really great to have you all with us today, and look forward to seeing you on the next session. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you.